So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you. I am delighted to be here and so grateful for my colleagues' brilliant presentations, lots of connecting thoughts, lots of connecting experiences too. So I'm looking forward to our talk. I'm in coastal North Carolina in the Wilmington area, although my origins are in the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania, and that has a lot to do with how I think about mutual aid. I'm going to kind of skip through basically wanted to be clear that I'm basically a colleague with concerns and some thoughts on some of these ideas. So no other agenda than that. I think Michelle brilliantly set forward the context in terms of what we're in now. So I'm hoping that many of us are more like the picture to the top left than the other one, but I am witnessing a lot of people around me that are vacillating between those two spaces. And particularly the word that comes most often is a sense of being overwhelmed. And that is not by, I don't know why that went back. That's not by accident, it's the goal. Um, the strategy that is being currently that we're dealing with in our country is a strategy that's been used for decades. From Chile to Katrina, all these different kinds of experiences of the overwhelm that we're dealing with as a strategy. A good resource for understanding this, because I don't have a lot of time to talk about it, is the book and the movie, The Shock Doctrine. That really gives you a very clear sense of how this strategy works. But that's what we're in. It's by design. Now, the kinds of risks that we're dealing with, obviously for all of us, for all people, there is already um, actual widespread harm in the world. There's more coming possibly, and we're dealing with both institutions that we need and the economy in flux currently. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on what social workers are dealing with and what are some critical things with regard to experience that personally and professionally. We all understand the impacts of secondary traumatic stress in our work. We also understand and probably have experienced at some point in a career burnout. What I want to focus on, particularly with regard to what's happening currently, is the kind of restraints that exist when you are dealing with anticipatory and mandated compliance that violates your ethics, and particularly the area of moral distress. And I think that this is particularly important when you're dealing with students and early career social workers, um, because it isn't something that it isn't something that you experience early on, but you are dealing with it in moments like we're in right now, because you're being pushed in many cases to do things that violate what you believe are the right things to do and what you've been taught to do. And the impact of moral distress it can be very, very, very powerful and destructive in people. It has both short and long-term consequences, um, including burnout, exhaustion, numbness, disconnection, and diminished moral sensitivity. And you can easily see how dangerous those things would be in working with people. And it's going to take us a different kind of supervision to deal with things as they continue to flow, because it's very clear to me that social workers, like all other workers, are going to be very much affected by the cuts that are happening. They already are, and it isn't going to get any better for some time, I don't think. So this for me is the reason why the response that I think is really critical. Um, I recognize that we're in uniquely deep trouble in a way, because the levels of polarization that exist currently complicate things significantly for creating mutual aid and for minimizing the harm that is happening as a result of the intended chaos. Um, I believe that expanding the use of mutual aid will be about among the most effective ways to support all people, and particularly the most vulnerable among us, and hopefully reduce the polarization that we're dealing with. And I think thirdly that we social workers are very uniquely prepared to be helpful in that regard. So I think when we're thinking about where to proceed, we always begin with hope. Without hope, there's nowhere to go. And this particular quote has always meant a great deal to me in terms of thinking about how critical hope is. And hope's not a lottery ticket that you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. It's an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have in order to, sorry about that, to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable. And that's from Hope in the Dark. And so we kind of start with that, and then I want to ask you to think about very brief thought project. Have you ever been helped where it didn't feel good to you? I just want to ask you to think about these, and as the stories come up in your mind from, as you consider these questions, let them sit with you and stay with you for a while, particularly because it'll help you understand a lot of what we're going to be talking about with regard to mutual aid. If you were helped and it was a really good and affirming experience, what was? Think about stories of that in your life. And for those of you that are practitioners, have you ever helped someone and it felt good or right? Or helped someone and looked back with regret about the interaction? Or saw a helping interaction just literally made you cringe? So, as you think about that, I want to talk a little bit about what a key response for us in these times can be, and that is in mutual aid. Now, this is a term that a lot of people are familiar with largely because it comes up a lot with regard to disaster preparedness. Um, Even the corporations and utility companies have mutual aid agreements. So when you see a storm and you see all those trucks going around, that's because there has been a mutual aid agreement in place in order to make that happen. But far beyond that, our mutual aid has been really a very old notion, as you can well imagine, that it comes from the anarchist philosopher Peter Kropotkin. And in his book, this book here, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, he argued that cooperation, not competition, was the driving mechanism behind evolutionary progress through biological mutualism. And this was a real departure from the ideas of his time. This is 1902, when the notions of social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, were the most critical and widespread. And the recognition of the widespread character and individual benefit of mutual aid stood in contrast to those theories, and they also stood in contrast to some of the liberal theories of people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who thought that cooperation was just motivated by spirituality and mutual love and not by practicality. So mutual aid is a way of care that's based in a collective where people support one another based on solidarity, not charity or saviorism. It's reciprocal, relationship based, and is outside of established institutions typically. Said far more beautifully by Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, what happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together or we can feast together. All flourishing is mutual. In our oldest stories, we're reminded that when we rely deeply on other lives, there's an urgency to protect them. So mutual aid is also interdependency. We often think about the contrast between independence and dependence, and seldom really think about that most of our life is interdependency. You think about when Michelle was talking about the life of the hive. That is clear, one of the best examples of that exists. Mia Mingus writes that interdependency is both the you and I and the we. It's solidarity in the best sense of the word. It's inscribing community on our skin over and over and over again. It's truly moving together in an impressive world towards liberation and refusing to let the personal be a scapegoat for the political. It's knowing that one organization, one student, or one community group is not a movement. It's working in coalition and collaboration. Because the truth is, we need each other. And every time we turn away from each other, we turn away from ourselves. We know this. So, one of the other key benefits of mutual aid that is discussed in many, sorry about that. I don't know why this keeps happening. Let me go back. Is how mutual aid can also lead to actual civic changes. In Paradise Built in Hell, Rebecca Solnit argues that during collective disasters, the suspension of the usual order and the failure of most systems spur widespread acts of altruism. And I'm sure you've seen these, most recently within the during the time of the pandemic. And these improvisation can lead to lasting civics change. And we will see this really clearly when we talk about mutual aid that was part of social movements. So mutual aid is fundamental and crucial in social movements. It's really what often begins them and sustains them. It's both a strategy for survival and a practice of resistance. It meets the immediate needs of the people that are the movement. And movements will die without any kind of mutual aid because the people can't be sustained in them. And within movements, you see two critical areas for this. First of all, the centrality of relationships. Within movement work, if you are not in right relationship to one another, the movement will not sustain. It will fracture. And you probably remember the writing of Dr. King on these issues about how critical it was for there to be a multiracial coalition because the forces that oppose us are always working to divide us to be able to crush movements. So the care and in development of intentional relationships, fundamental, and also projects of survival. This is what we often call these within movements. People have to survive until the revolution happens, right? So mutual aid is what enables the resources to flow into the people that need them in order to keep organizing. Now, a couple of great illustrations of this in movements. I want to talk about a few of them. Probably the most incredibly brilliant and highly developed was the work of the Black Panther Party. In terms of the Black Panther Party developed a mutual aid system that entailed more than 60 different programs of care, where their intention was to make sure that members were served body and soul. These acts included at least 5 major medical programs, 3 major food distribution programs, including the breakfast program in schools that is now part of what was inspired by the Panther Party. A new service, distribution of resources like clothes and shoes. Also the SAFE program, which was focused on transporting elders to get through places safely, and also to transport people to those loved ones detained in the criminal legal system, and offering a range of culturally relevant schooling from preschool on up. Also housing and employment programs. These were transformative programs that created deep and lasting change, and you see them still in place in many parts of the country. In addition to that movement, and I was thinking as Obaye was talking, how much his work echoes the work that I talk about when we talk about the Black Panther Party. The battered women's movement. I am so sorry for this. I do not know what is happening. I'm not touching it. It's just doing its own thing. The battered women's movement created safe homes and hotlines in the home of people in the community to get women out of abusive situations and often onto the new Underground Railroad, and it was, as it was called, to get people way out of their areas to preserve their lives. The Poor People's Campaigns, both in its original form led by Dr. King and current forms, including the Poor People's Army that evolved from the Poor People's Campaign for Economic Human Rights and the Kensington Welfare Union, the National Welfare Rights Organization, the National Homeless Union, and the current Poor People's Campaign formed in 2017, where the Repairers of the Breach and Reverend Barber partnered with the Cairo Center in order to move forward a large-scale organization, the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival. I'm hoping you're seeing that. Um, Also, if you think about it, during Katrina, the Cajun Navy is a really great example of mutual aid. There was the incredible overwhelm in getting people rescued, completely outstripped the resources that existed, and the officials called for 30 boats and they got 400. And that Navy still is working today in many different organizations or in many different disasters. Also, COVID-19 mutual aid networks. When the pandemic overwhelmed just about every kind of institution and organization that existed, um, so many people organized ways of helping one another get personal protective equipment, to make masks for people who needed them, all sorts of things like distributing food and so on. We all lived through this together, so I'm sure you remember a lot of this. But it is also one of the resources I'm going to suggest to you, which is the Mutual Aid Hub. Actually was developed during this time, and you can go online and use that resource even now. So, a couple of thoughts. Macro practice skills have never been more important than they are right now. This is not a time where we should help people be adjusted to a profoundly sick society. This is a time where we need to recognize that it's time to organize. And social workers, whether you've been actually formally trained in organizing or not, when you look at all the different skills that go into organizing in that wheel, social workers typically have at least the basis for all of those, as well as do many other people in the community. The next thing that you can use those basically to build on what you have to get more advanced training. One suggestion that's an organization active in North Carolina currently is the Industrial Aerials Foundation, which was the Saul Alinsky work. One of the best trainings you can have, and they have been active particularly in Greensboro in North Carolina, and it's a fantastic, I can attest, it's a fantastic and very effective training to use. Now, a couple of things that I think also could be useful for folks as you think about ways to help build some of the bases that we need for building community. Some of you that are social workers are going to recognize that map form is going to look familiar, but it isn't the same map form that we were using with regard what we typically call an ecogram. Pod mapping is a really, really useful idea that was developed by the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. And it was developed actually to help people figure out what they would need in terms of support if they were dealing with violence or if they were themselves being accountable for their own violence. Since then, it's been really helpful to map and understand support systems. So there's a lot of material on this online. I wanted to just highlight it for you, but essentially what people do is that gray circle is you. The circle around you are all of the different people and other kinds of resources that you consider your primary support. So mapping them out ahead of time has been really useful to people because if you think about it, when you're stressed and dealing with a lot of stuff going on, you're not thinking about all the resources that you have. So to have that done ahead of time is really useful and has been really affirming for a lot of folks. The other one I'd like to highlight is all the different ways of community conversations happening. One of the ones that I was inspired by, I'm a Loyola grad, so Chicago is very important to me. And while I was in the Chicago area, I met people who were working on the project of the Chicago Community Trust called At the Table. And this was a phenomenal project. I don't know if you had experience with it, but it brought people from all over the city to talk across identities and difference on topics to improve the community and the region. And it led to similar projects throughout the nation, that many of which were funded by the Knight Foundation. So that particular way of operating is, I think, a very useful way to get people started on building community so that we can move more into aspects of mutual aid. The other resource that I think can be useful, and I have mixed feelings about this organization, I participate in it, but I do think there's a power in it. I don't know if you've ever dealt with Braver Angels. This is a national organization that has a lot of local branches of it, but it's specifically focused on reducing political polarization. And so this organization at the national level does a lot of online webinars and debates and different kinds of conversations, but also it has many different local chapters that engage people very directly into talking about why they are coming from the place they come from and really to get some understanding built. It's not intended to have people shift one another. It's really intended to really break the polarization that exists. And I think this is critical because in a time of polarization where community building is all that more difficult, it's more dangerous a time, I think, in order to be able to move mutual aid. So having some strategies around discussing across difference and across particularly across polarization has been really helpful. And I've seen that myself in my own community. So there we go. So a couple of final thoughts. In a time like this, mutual aid itself is an act of resistance. Um, so as you look at that gorgeous poem that really I find really helpful to think through what I need to do on a daily basis, please consider using the liberatory tactic of mutual aid to respond to the present moment, to sustain people, and particularly those that are most vulnerable to the vagaries of racial capitalism. Above all, do not comply in advance with the forces that seek to oppress and invalidate you and the people you serve. Resist what you know violates our code of ethics and gather your pod around you to act in response. Never be sitting out in the branch like that bird. You always have to have your pod with you for safety and for solidarity and for sanity. And then finally, I do not know why this is messing with me. Identify and build your community, and particularly help people in client status that you're working with to do this work. You're going to learn from them in doing this work because there's a lot, the wisdom in the community is just as valuable as the wisdom and the knowledge that comes from the education, that formal education you have. But it's critical to do this ahead of time, right now, as things continue to shift. And hopefully, beyond getting us through and beyond, maybe we'll have come out of it with some better civic organization than we currently have. I have shared with you a couple of key resources that have been really helpful and I'm connected to. So we'd love to be in conversation with people in terms of how these resources are useful. And then I have many other ones depending on what kind of area you're interested in. And then finally, the last part are some of the resources that I used in developing this talk.